from FT Live in partnership with SAP Concur. And we are going to be looking at identifying and addressing the challenges faced by small and medium business, changing social mores, and the rise of political populism that's quite hostile to business. Also much tougher credit conditions. But at the same time, the usual challenges apply. Inspiring staff, building strong balance sheets, and fighting the machinations of rivals who are trying to eat your lunch in the market. And we have a very distinguished panel here today to pick some of those issues apart, starting with Kit Aspen, who is the founder of Thrust Carbon. He has 10 years of experience within the technology, travel, and sustainability sectors. Day to day, Kit is responsible for product development, focusing on solving real customer problems. We're also joined by Anna Bryson from the west coast of the US. She's Chief Financial Officer of Doximity. She leads financial strategy and operations in support of the company's rapid growth trajectory. Doximity has a really impressive app which is used by physicians for workflow management and a whole series of other activities besides. And since 2017, Anna has held various senior finance roles within the company. She holds both a BA and an MA in philosophy, politics, and economics from the University of Oxford. I'd also like to welcome Laura Wincup. She's Chief Executive Officer of Ford's Packaging Systems, and her career spans global engineering, technology, investment management, and sustainability. As CEO, she is committed to bringing eco-conscious innovation to the forefront of the industry. She's an established investment manager with a background in venture capital and in portfolio management. She's usually based in the UK, but she's traveling at the moment and is in the US, where we will also find Ryan Desmarais, Global Head of Sales for small and medium businesses at SAP Concur. He oversees global sales with an emphasis on small and mid-sized business organizations. The company itself is a spend management technology company with more than 50,000 customers in 150 countries. Ryan provides SMBs with solutions for travel, expense, invoice, compliance, and risk. And this gives him an absolutely tremendous platform to see what's going on across this space, to compare the problems and find common solutions for smaller businesses. So I think, Ryan, probably we should start with you. One point I should make, however, is we want your questions. Please submit those via the chat. If I get enough of them, I'll be feeding them into the conversation as we go along, and we also have time at the end. It's your session, so make the most of it. So, Ryan, what do you think are the biggest challenges faced by SMBs at the moment? And do they vary a lot based on size, location, and sector?
I think that that's a tremendous question to start with, Jonathan. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with such an established panel. There are a lot of different issues that are out there for SMBs today. I think when I speak with our customer base, which we focus in on the small and medium-sized businesses in the US, UK, Canada, and Australia, the macroeconomic situation really comes to play for us. When you talk about inflation being the biggest concern for them, our solutions help them manage that spend. And that's what they come to us and talk about on a regular basis, which is, Ryan, we're under pressure. We need to grow. We need to remain profitable, which means we need to control our costs. But we also don't want to, ruin our employee experience in the process. So what can we do with you and your solution to help us, grow and scale while also, providing some of that level of authority and visibility in our businesses? And so that's where we spend our time, is talking about how do you manage your categories of spend, how do you manage your suppliers, while giving your employees tools and solutions to meet those compliance regulations. So that's how I'd answer the question to get us started, Jonathan. I think that it's the common problems that we all hear about so much: cost of living, rising costs, and taking care of employees.
Absolutely. And do you see pivoting in terms of the categories of cost which are the most problems for people at the moment?
I think humans are, the human condition is pretty static. I think there is, a pretty well-established set of costs when it comes to operating within a business. I think the problem that we experience in today is inflation is popping up in new ways in different areas. And so you're seeing some costs spike uncontrollably, and you have to respond to those. I would just say that the cost of petrol or fuel being one of them. If you're a business which has employees having to move around to engage with customers, you can see those costs scale up. I would say some new areas that businesses are struggling with are, in relation to those costs, is hybrid work has not really been answered fully. A lot of businesses are trying to go back into the office. Employees are maybe, relocated into new areas, and how they navigate accommodating those employees while controlling costs has been a new variant to the existing costs that we have, that's been difficult for some businesses to get their hands around.
Indeed so. And you raised some very interesting points there. I wanted to just drill down a bit, start with cost categories, and then maybe we can talk a bit about hybrid working and relations with employees afterwards. And I wanted to bring in Laura. You're an eco-conscious packaging business. You have quite a complex supply chain. Can you tell us a little bit about the impact of inflationary costs on your own business and how you've tried to manage it?
Yeah, it's very affected throughout the globe, and I think it's something that our customers are very conscious of themselves because of the way that the inflation is working. Everybody is impacted, so it means that there's a real spread of responsibility and also the reciprocal response that they're feeling the same pressures. So really, it's down to the communication being there. I would say our biggest is the electrical sector, so working with all of the HDMIs and PLCs, inflation and just timelines. They are pushing timelines out on machines to what would have been 6 months is nearly 2 years in the making. So it's really having an impact on people's speed to come to market. They've obviously got sustainability goals they want to address, and the inflation is having such an impact on timelines generally that everything is actually taking quite a backseat and not coming to market in the timeframes it should be. So it's having a much wider impact than just that cost impact.
So perhaps what you're seeing is that people are using equipment for much longer periods of time. Their replacement cycle has lengthened, and at the same time they're being driven by things like pressures to reduce carbon, which might be served by faster replacement, really. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's really started to affect the supply chain generally. Their sustainability goals for the next 5 to 10 years that they need to hit, but also the fact that, reducing plastics, reducing weights, it's really put everyone in a conundrum of which foot they should be stepping forward with, because they're looking to keep their machines because of the way inflation's going. To buy a new, better machine isn't double, it's nearly triple the cost.
Right. Well, perhaps Kit on that, because you're advising people on their carbon footprints all the time. So this is presumably a phenomenon that you come across in your daily work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the sustainability side, some of the biggest changes in sustainability legislation worldwide are coming into effect next year. So across the whole of the EU, there's going to be new reporting requirements. The SEC in America is currently exploring new reporting requirements. And so this trickles down the entire value chain, because on the one hand, you have these economic pressures, and so you're trying to cut costs. On the other hand, you know that you need to act more sustainably, and exactly as Laura's saying, right? There's a cost associated with that, and that's a rising cost. And so incredible pressures that are being applied there. On our side, we see it largely on the buying cycle. Customers are tightening the purse strings for very good reasons, which is all costs are going up everywhere. It's an uncertain market. So why would you purchase a new product, a new piece of software right now, rather than wait 12 months and have a bit more certainty? So the challenging market conditions really do kind of send shockwaves through every sector, including the SMB sector as well.
So, Anna, are you immune to this? Because you have some impressive technology, you have AI that presumably saves physicians money in their practices. Do you find that you've got a slower buying cycle, or does the nature of your technology protect you from that?
We certainly are not immune to it. As you know, I think everyone's kind of feeling the pressure in this market. You know, it's no secret that SMBs can oftentimes be resource constrained. You know, we've alluded to that in probably every one of the panelist answers here. So we really focus at Doximity on productivity and operational efficiency, and we're leaning into AI as much as we can to help deliver that. So we're super excited about the impact that AI can have, not just internally on our own operations, but also in the healthcare community that we serve. So we're very focused on using generative AI to address the burdensome administrative and reimbursement tasks that take time away from patient care. So using AI has helped us a lot, but it doesn't make us immune to what we're seeing in the greater macro.
And you're based in California, you're a tech business. What's the picture in terms of hiring? Because I've certainly read and indeed edited quite a lot of pieces from my team around the world saying that it's getting a bit easier to hire tech people. Is that what you're seeing on the ground as well?
Yeah, it's historically been very challenging. So being a lesser known health tech company in the Bay Area, when you're surrounded by, you know, the sexy Apple and Google, it's been very difficult for us to compete for top engineering talent. But lately, you know, as everyone's been kind of tightening their belts and we have unfortunately seen some layoffs, it has made competing for talent a lot easier. And especially for mission-driven companies like Doximity, we've been able to attract a lot of people who are really interested in helping the healthcare community.
Great, that's good news. I wondered, Ryan, what's the sort of broader picture across the small to medium business paradigm? Is it easier to hire now? What's the kind of trend at the moment? We've seen inflation, I think, hopefully peaking in the UK, for example.
Yeah, well, I think when you talk about attracting talent or retaining talent, I think one of the things to consider is it is a very dynamic time in business, right? And so businesses are looking for these very highly qualified, skilled up individuals who can add value back to organizations. Maybe they're more familiar with technology. Maybe they have an ability or experience with AI and machine learning that allows them to come in. And I would say that SMBs do still struggle at times to find the right pools to go into and to attract those organizations. It is better, as Anna said. You know, I think that the playing field is leveling, and I think that one of the things that we've seen SMBs do, whether it's purpose-driven or more flexibility, those are ways that they're making themselves more attractive to these candidates that maybe they wouldn't have had access to before. But that then brings its own set of challenges when you talk about, you know, controlling costs. If you're going to go and attract remote talent, you know, how do you bring those people in to join into the company culture and participate? So now you've got things like more business travel. Maybe you weren't accounting for that before. And, you know, uniquely, right, there's actually less business travel happening, but it's more expensive than it's ever been today just due to the personal travel. So, well, I would say it's a very mixed bag when it comes down to that opportunity. But in general, small and medium-sized businesses are better off today than they've been when it comes to attracting talent. And if you're out there looking to attract some of that talent, talking about the perks, your systems and your processes to bring those individuals in is a big lift that helps to bring them closer to you.
So do you think there's been a little bit of a cultural change, perhaps? Because certainly 20, 30 years ago, the idea of young people quite often as they entered the workforce was to join a very large business, join an IBM, join a GE or a BP, something with in theory, very steady kind of career trajectory. Is it easier these days, if you're a startup, to try and get people who are interested in being in at the beginning of something special, and also something that has a degree of, say, environmental purpose that you can try and amplify a little in your recruitment process? Is it a different cohort?
Well, as an elder millennial, I won't speak for all of the generations here, but I would say that small and medium-sized businesses have always been successful. I think Anna mentioned it, like a very purpose-driven sort of initiative. And I think that technology has made it easier for them to get their passions out there for people to fall in love with. And I would say that, yeah, my assumption and my general statement is that individuals in today's environment and economy are starting to right size their investments into their professional lives versus their personal lives, which is to say the work-life balance is coming back in. Technology has made that possible because it increases the productivity. You can get more out of your existing employees to drive those initiatives. So yes, Jonathan, in a way, I would say it's shifted. That's a general statement, but that's my belief.
Very good. And Laura, what's your expectation? Do you think the contracts change slightly between employers and employees? Is it easy to get people into the office? Are they putting in enough hours for you? I mean, obviously there has to be some sort of minimal level of commitment for the whole deal to work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it has gone through quite a landscape change. And what we're seeing now, or especially what Fords are seeing now, is a very different interview process and a very different questioning. It's about what the mission of the business is. It's about what we stand for, and it's about the passion that we actually exude for what we're doing. And that has really engaged in a very different level of interview, a different level of employee that comes on. And, not really having that employer-employee relationship, but more of you're on the same mission and you're creating more of a tribe. I know that sounds a little cliche, but it really has quite a different energy shift. And I think when you get into that phase, it actually means that, you in theory have a workforce of entrepreneurs that have as much invested in the company and the mission and what you're doing going forward for themselves, because they really believe that what you're doing is of a benefit, that the work and the overtime and the attention to detail becomes part of that. So I would say I'm very thankful to see the shift in people's personalities and what they're being driven to achieve. And I think that's really only come about in the last, 2 to 3 years. Previously, it was all, what are you going to pay me? What's my commissions? How many days holiday do I get? And I'm not seeing those conversations anymore, which is really nice, actually.
Very good. And Anne, do you find that your engagement with healthcare, is that an advantage to you in hiring?
Absolutely.
It's
I think
socially valuable activity.
Absolutely. I think to Laura's point, and Ryan mentioned this earlier, is, people want to be a part of a mission-driven company. And we're noticing that people are really engaging in something that can actually help shape the ecosystem, especially after the COVID pandemic and everyone having firsthand experience with how inefficient the healthcare system can be. We are able to attract a lot of people who are really interested in the mission. And then there's also some other benefits, I think, just kind of piggybacking off what Ryan and Lauren were talking about for SMBs is, employees often have the opportunity to take on more responsibility and advance in their careers more quickly, which we're seeing more interest in. It's a little bit harder to do that at a conglomerate. And it also, SMBs have more intimate and collaborative work environments, which we're seeing employees really attracted to as well.
Great. And I think it's fair to say that in smaller companies, there is a sense of team spirit that you don't necessarily get in a huge multinational, where people maybe sort of do 2 or 3 jobs perhaps instead of just half of one in a huge company. So I think there's always been a natural tendency that way. I wondered actually, Kit, whether you find your customers, one of the reasons that they want to reduce their carbon footprint is to do with attracting people and feeling that the business is a values-based one, or is it mostly driven by the legislation?
Depends on the company, depends on where they are in the world. But yeah, for many companies, it is people driven. Both millennials and Gen Z say the climate is the most important issue of their generation, and people say they want to work for 60% of people say they want to work for a company that has sustainability at its core. And so the more a company can do to align to that, the better. And it often, to get on the track to start making the first steps, often isn't a huge amount of work, isn't a huge day one cost. And it has to be done anyway because of the legislation. And so if you can do that, and then you can start increasing employee retention or make it easier to hire as a result, well, then the benefits compound and you can make a economic case for why it makes sense to be sustainable. And so yeah, I think a lot of our customers, that internal narrative that they can build around sustainability is definitely a good reason for exploring solutions like ours.
Great. Well, that's alignment in terms of employers and employees. Perhaps I intrude on private grief if I mention the alignment of governments particularly, because the way in which governments deal with small to medium-sized enterprises is fairly patchy, frankly, around the world. I think it's fair to say. It kind of comes and goes, these initiatives. And Laura, I think you've had to deal with some really pretty hideous regulatory changes here in the UK. Could you just give people a snapshot of that and how you've tried to deal with it?
Yeah, I think we've had a bit of an onslaught the last few years. And, you know, what people forget with SMBs is there is a huge range of the size. So not everyone has a full legal counsel sat there at their disposal. You know, it's something that you're dealing with and your employees are dealing with that is nearly another full-time job on top of what they're already doing. So, you know, from our point of view, being manufacturers and engineers, we got hit by a number of things, from the GDPR rules through to the environmental regulations. Then came the intellectual property changes. We had the import and export changes from Brexit, all about the same time, followed by, you know, an example of a total catastrophe was the CE and UKCA marking, which we had been battling through this last, you know, 2 years, trying to understand what we were meant to do, because there was no clear defined rules on which one, you know, you needed to divest out of, how you pulled the UKCA together. We were going back and
just
forth.
to interrupt, just
Yeah.
for people who don't know, this is an environmental standard marking, is that right?
This is a machine marking, so this is a CE. It's like the matching of a CE marking, but after Brexit, it's split into a UKCA and a CE for exporting machines or keeping machines local. And, you know, for machine manufacturers, you cannot send a machine out that hasn't got the right regulatory stamps on it.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
And it was really challenging. I mean, we thought we were sort of bashing our heads against a brick wall for 2 years. Lo and behold, last month, they pulled the UKCA because the government hadn't put any clear regulations out of what that should be. However, many businesses for the last 2 years, including ourselves, have spent a great deal of money on consultants trying to decipher what it is that we're being asked to do, because the regulation was coming in hard, you know, at the beginning of this year. So it's really unfair, I think, to a lot of SMBs that they throw this legislation out there. They say you need to comply by a date, and they really don't understand the impact and the resource requirement it takes to go behind and make that possible. And that's something I think that really does need to be addressed in the government.
And just to take a question from the audience, to what extent do you think smaller businesses are able to have a voice in policy making?
I think we all need to raise our voice a lot more than what we do. I think, given our size, we seem to have not an inferiority complex, but I think everyone thinks along the same lines that no one's going to listen. But actually, I think what we should be doing is all having one united voice to say, we're not going to accept this anymore. If there's a legislation change, get your facts in order, get that legislation thoroughly set, and then give us a date and we'll comply. But until that's sorted, don't start, you know, fishing out there and saying we're going to do this, because it's almost like threatening the companies. So I think we actually have to stand up and be more vocal and not just accept it and take it in our daily duties that that's something we need to comply. So it's a shift in mentality I think we all need to take responsibility for.
And Anna, what's the picture like in your industry? Because you're presumably dealing sometimes with some quite sensitive data that physicians are sending to each other or exchanging with patients. How clear and user-friendly is the regulatory environment for you in your industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the reasons why we built Doximity, and a part of Doximity is being able to send HIPAA secure messages and having HIPAA secure telehealth calls. That was one thing during the pandemic that was really difficult. People weren't able to get in front of their doctors live, and so we all had to resort to telehealth, and people were doing telehealth calls on Zoom, all different channels that might not have been HIPAA secure. So we created a HIPAA secure telehealth platform right away. Privacy is incredibly important. Patient privacy is one of the most important parts of the medical healthcare system. And on top of that, though, then back to regulation, we struggled with there was different reimbursements for telehealth calls than there was for live in-person visits. And so that took quite a while to get through and to change. But being HIPAA secure is kind of what's at the first and foremost part of our platform.
Very good. And in AI, we read a lot about it. You're at the epicenter of all this. Do you think it can change? Is it really going to change much for most smaller businesses, or has it been talked up a little bit? What's your sort of thumbnail sketch of the opportunity?
Personally, I think the opportunity is huge. I think we're all just learning. It's all so new, and so we're all just really learning what AI really can do. But we have found tremendous value in utilizing it, not only for our own internal operations and for our team, and to drive efficiency when we are more budget constrained as an SMB, but also providing value to the healthcare ecosystem. And some of the things that it can do from a time-saving perspective, I mean, it's crazy how much time doctors spend on reimbursement support and going back and forth with insurance companies, and being able to use AI to just quickly create an appeal saves so much time. So, and that's just the tip of the iceberg on the healthcare side. So I think AI absolutely can be very transformative.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to take another one from the audience, and do send us some more questions because we can keep them coming, which is in relation to the availability of financing. The question is, how big is the impact of the SME financing gap, and has it deteriorated because of higher rates? That's maybe one for you, Ryan, since you have a finger on costs.
Yeah, I mean, I think the availability of financing is certainly a real consideration for all of these businesses. Every cost of capital has increased. Introduce a variable, right, depending upon your financing provider, whether it's private equity or venture capital or your banking partners. And so access to capital is critical, which means businesses which are in startup mode, small and medium-sized businesses which are trying to scale up, the cost control becomes massively important. You as a business now need to show your path to profitability much faster to ensure that your finances remain intact. There's a lot of clauses which are included in these financing terms which haven't really been exercised just because everyone was so focused on growth. And now as that view or that lens changes down into profitability and insulation, those contract terms come back forward, which is all to say cost controls are equally as important when it comes to the availability of finance, because you have to show that path in. I would also wanted to reach back across to something that Kit said regarding sustainability and the value to organizations as it relates to this conversation. There's a whole movement happening across the globe in terms of the value of sustainability to an organization, and being able to display how you're participating, whether there's regulation or not, with regard to sustainability efforts, will actually change the way that you're able to attract that investment into your organization, right? There's a whole genre of investors that have grown up now wanting to invest in sustainable businesses, and if you're not participating, you won't be able to attract that finance.
No, absolutely. Well, I think that's one for you, Kit. And indeed, we do have an agenda point about sustainability, which asks how can growth and sustainability sit as dual priorities? If you could talk to that, that would be great. And also, any quick wins in sustainability? I don't know what the answer is. You're probably going to say it isn't quite as simple as stopping anybody from getting on an aeroplane and going to see a client. What?
Well, there are quick wins. I think in terms of growth and sustainability, customers want to buy more sustainable products, right? Which is why when we go into a shop now, everything has a badge on it that says that it's more sustainable. They've reduced the amount of plastic and whatever that is, right? And one of the reasons for that is consumers are willing to buy more sustainable products and often are putting their money where their mouth is, which is great. And so actually there is an economic case to make for being more sustainable. And then we also, as we discussed earlier, there is a retention case, there's a recruitment case that delivers real value. The average cost of hiring someone is over $10,000 on average for a large company. Well, all of a sudden, if you hopefully your costs are below that when you're an SMB, but still, like, you can quickly understand that you are reabsorbing your sustainability costs. In terms of quick wins, depends on the business. The place to start with sustainability is always with your data. Really try and understand your emissions. It's not as complicated as people think. There are a lot of tools out there. Obviously, we have tools ourselves, but there's a lot of them out there. And then from that, you'll start identifying what the quick wins are. So, the classic example for many businesses is switch over to a green energy tariff. That doesn't increase cost nearly as much as anyone thinks it does. And in some cases, it can reduce costs. But all of a sudden, you can hugely reduce your carbon emissions as a business. Sometimes sustainability and reducing costs can also align. So, it's difficult financial conditions at the moment. Businesses want to reduce how much they're spending on their expenses. Well, you can use the sustainability argument to help make that case. Maybe you should reduce the amount of travel you're doing, and therefore you're going to reduce your travel expenditure. That's not necessarily the tool for every business, but it is a tool that exists. And when both these things align, then it just helps the business overall.
And could you remind me where we've got to in terms of the different scopes that companies are supposed to think about? I think scope 1 originally was your direct carbon cost, and scope 3 is mapping it along the supply chain, which seems to be fantastically hard. To what extent are smaller companies wrestling with things like scope 3 at the moment?
Scope 3 is always a difficult one. So yes, scope 1 is emissions that you directly emit. So this is burning fuels, whether that's fuels in the vehicles that you own or fuels from running a factory. Scope 2 is purchased emissions, so effectively purchasing electricity and the emissions from that. And then yes, scope 3 is your entire value chain, everything else, every product you buy, every flight your business takes, everything, even downstream, the emissions from disposing of your products, all of that is scope 3. And so it's incredibly hard because it's a how long is a piece of string question. Your upstream emissions, which is part of scope 3, is everything that's happened above you. And so you need to work out when you spend a pound, a dollar here, what are the emissions that were associated with that, and also those downstream emissions, trying to work out what happens with the waste of your products that's incredibly hard to work out. Really, most businesses realize they need to use a tool for this. There are lots of ways of working out what all of these things look like. A lot of those ways are able to just use your spend amount. So we're a partner with SAP Concur, for example. We can connect through their App Center into any SAP Concur instance and calculate from all of their expense data, right? So it's tooling like that will make your life easier. And again, I don't want to just plug us. There are other tools out there. They are very useful. Otherwise, there's just so many different types of purchases a business makes, it does become almost unmanageable. So I would recommend look for the tool that's going to be right for your business to help calculate your footprint.
Great. Well, a couple of very interesting points there. In terms of supply chain, Laura, have you tried to think about Scope 3, or is it just really too nebulous, do you think, for a practical business person to engage with on a daily basis?
It is very nebulous, and I think for what we do, we're caught very much in between the two movements. So we're working with the big players, the Unilevers and the Coca-Colas and the PepsiCos, which have their agendas set, and they're very prescriptive about what they want and how they want to work with you. So you can't set your own destiny, so to speak, because you need to comply with, you need to get in their lane. But there is things we can do on our side as well. What I've found very useful, and what I've said to a number of people within our sort of industry, where we're generating machines, we're generating ideas, you're in the middle, you're the middle player between large forces, is B Corporation has actually got some very good guidelines. A lot of our customers are qualifying for B Corp now, and it actually sets you on the right path of how you should think about a business. Their questions and the way that they go about the qualification, which you may or may not want to get, but actually having that list of questions that just makes you think about your business differently, about your movements, about your decisions. It actually is a really good exercise. I recommend anyone, who hasn't had a look at B Corp to have a look and just look at the questions, because that starts to make everything just that little bit more achievable. I think when you look at it on the global platform and you think, okay, stage 3, this is how we approach it, you almost just want, to run away and hide your head, especially if you're actually producing equipment, because it is just, you don't know where to start and where to stop.
It's exactly impossible if you have a large range of component suppliers.
Yeah.
How you supposed to track all of them, and some of them will be components within sub-assemblies. The sub-assemblies come
Exactly.
from this kind of thing. Another thing Kit mentioned really was interoperability and connecting data services together. He has a service that connects up with SAP Concur, and this is something I come in across a lot talking to businesses, which is trying to create a kind of interoperable set of data pools that can be used to inform your management of your business better and the functioning of your business better. I wondered, Anna, would you like to come in on that and tell us how we should go about that? I often visit businesses which have hundreds or even thousands of different data activities within them, none of which speak to each other.
Yeah, that's something that's been really important at Doximity as we've been building out our platform here, is ease of use. That's to your point, Jonathan. There's so many different tools you can use as a employee at an SMB or as a end user or end customer of the SMB. And so for us, we focus tremendously on building everything in one platform. So as much as you can, I know SAP does a really good job of that as well, as much as you can build everything in one platform and make it as easy to navigate as possible, the better. So we focus a ton on that for our end customer and our end user is that ease of use.
Very good. Well, look, it's time for some more questions now. So I'm just going to take a quick look to see what we have here. One question, actually, which is I think a perennial one for smaller businesses, is the amount of time you wait for invoices to be paid. And I've certainly come to businesses that wait, for years. They have bad debts which go on for very long periods of time. Sometimes from very large and well-known companies. The standard is 90 days in theory. What's the real life experience? It makes a huge difference to cash flow. Who'd like to talk on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say from our experience, yes, very much so. I mean, we always factor in a 90, 120 day, even if we've specified 30 or 60. And I think it's more about the mechanism of how you manage your business than being able to pull in that money a bit quicker. And especially if you're dealing on a global platform, you can have the most recognizable household name, But if they're in a different country, then they behave very differently to one maybe on your home territory. And I think, you know, we're all trying to reserve cash at the moment. We're all stringing out the payments for what you can. What I would say, actually, the banks are very good. I've noticed a change in the bank's appetite for supporting your debtors book. They've become much more competitive in ensuring that debtors book for a very reasonable cost. And I think, you know, for the smaller SMEs, that takes quite a lot of pressure off that heat of it's not coming in, it's not coming in. The banks will take over after the amount of time before you start to look at it as a bad debt. And actually they secure up to 95% of the debt. So, you know, it's something to look at, because I think this is going to be an ongoing saga for quite some time.
I think it never ends, I'm afraid. And
Jonathan, if I could come in on that one as well. I just,
yeah.
as SAP Concur, we do have a solution that helps small, medium-sized businesses manage this thing in particular. And I think one of the issues here is everyone here has talked about productivity, right? In terms of making your staff more productive. And I think that this is paying your bills or getting them keyed into the system is an area that's oftentimes very manual, and people are slow to automate it because they want to retain people's jobs and help them, you know, maintain that infrastructure within their business. And I would just urge you as companies to say there are very cost-effective solutions that will make your teams more productive, that give you the visibility immediately to handle that, to say, I know what are my expenses coming in, I know the POs that I've issued, that I have debt going out on, and it just is, it starts with visibility. And I would urge you to say there's a lot simpler ways to solve it. There's commercial modelers and vendors in place that can help with you, not just SAP Concur. There's lots of offerings, but this is where AI and machine learning is really great at getting the data in, increasing visibility, and an old saying for a reason, you can't manage what you can't see. So just start to see it, and then you can manage it better.
Yes, absolutely. And what do you think the aim of most people with running smaller businesses is these days? Is it to scale up and try and be bought out by a larger business later on? Or are some businesses staying small, perhaps for lifestyle reasons? What do you see? Go back to you again, Ryan, because you have this comparative overview.
I mean, there's certainly businesses that want to stay small. Yes, this is not, there was another saying, if you're not growing, you're dying, which I think is an absolute fallacy. I think that there are lots of organizations that have a very specific mission and vision that are in place. Take, for example, not-for-profits, right, that are solving very specific problems for organizations. They're not trying to grow across the world and globe. They maybe have a very specific purpose in place, and incurring large costs and growing isn't part of that. So I would say it's not necessarily new. I think that there's always been businesses that want to stay small, that want to enhance their impact, but maybe don't want to grow to be large scales. And then, of course, there are the businesses that are looking to be acquired. I mean, Concur as a solution was acquired by SAP, for example, and that is an exit strategy for a lot. But I don't think it's necessarily different.
And indeed, some people do it as serial entrepreneurs. And I came across an entrepreneur here in London who specializes in software as a service. And he's now on his third startup. I think he's sold the last two, so he's doing very nicely from it. Does anybody else want to come in on that issue of what the outlook is for business, what the overall aim is, and how perhaps it connects with the motivation of employees, the desire perhaps to buy something that is sold where you have stock on, for example?
Sure, I'll comment on that, Jonathan. I think one of the things that we've seen, especially in the Silicon Valley startups, that's changed a lot lately is it used to be a growth at all costs kind of initiative where it was growth, growth, growth. And now the market's turned to focus a lot more on profitability. So I think one of the challenges that SMBs are facing is that balancing growth with profitability, which is a little bit unique versus where they might have gone before. At the end of the day, though, you always do have to, like, stock options are a very valuable part of the employee's package. So it is really important, if you aren't aiming aiming for that exit or that IPO to continue to have options for employees, such as secondaries. I mean, it's something we had done at Doximity. So to give employees the opportunity to liquidate some of their assets as well over time. But I think the balance of growth and profitability has really changed things here for SMBs, at least in Silicon Valley.
No, I can see how that might work, because I think when there was a lot of funding around, and we've seen VC money has become very much harder to get, then you could do a couple of funding rounds. You would try to build market share as rapidly as possible around your core technological concept, and then there was a good chance that you might be able to sell out to a larger tech business. As we've discussed, pathway to profitability is now more of an issue. So it's maybe a little bit more of a slow burn. You're not going to have quite as much capital available. You're going to need that you can turn it into profits more immediately than had been the case in the past. So it probably is the time when there's a bit of a convergence between conventional smaller businesses that have to count their money very carefully indeed, and fast-growing startups in the tech space. But I'm very interested, Laura, that you think banks are more supportive than they used to be, because I remember during the sort of 2008, 2009 era, it was very tough indeed. A lot of banks pulled their support for smaller companies. You've seen a better response. I think what you referred to as insurance, is that factoring, or is that another kind of arrangement?
No, it's another type of arrangement. So I'll just caveat that by saying banks are being fully supportive in the more out there frame of things. So I think loans and everything else is still very hard to get.
A steady proposition is maybe a bit different.
Yeah. So I think, from a loan perspective, from a speculative perspective, they are very hard to deal with at the moment. It's very much like it was. What I would say is they are considering more the stabilization that they can give a business. So if there's something internal that they can support, that's what they're looking to do. So this actually debtor book support is very different to factoring. It literally just looks at your debtor book, and especially if you've got a good relationship with your bank, if you've been there for a while, looks at your debtor book. And it's like an insurance policy. So you can insure with your insurers against your debtor book. And then if anything turns to a bad debt, it's paid out. So, we say this to a lot of our other companies. If you're worried, if it's something where you need to look after the cash flow, you don't want to be taking in disproportionate amounts of yields on loans. You've got to pay them back at the end of the day. That puts a lot of pressure on the business, especially SMEs. So look to do things that are more stabilizing. And I think that's where banks are trying to be a little bit more helpful in what they can offer.
Very good. Well, we also have, I'm getting a final question, and I'm going to ask you, because we're getting a little bit short on time, I'm going to ask you to keep it quite short yourselves, which is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to enterprises, I assume larger businesses, selling to SMBs? So just one sentence from each of you. Let's start with Kit.
Cash flow is everything. So please pay your payment terms on time.
Okay. And Anna?
Discount, please.
Very good, yes. And Ryan?
Focus on the business's problems, not your solution.
Yes. Often forgotten, I think. And Laura?
And understand we're trying to help and support and be reflective to that.
Great. Well, look, thanks so much. I scribbled a few notes as we went along. You've had some great takeaways, I think, throughout the conversation. Sort of headline stuff was a new kind of workforce and a new kind of contract, really. But also governments are stuck in quite an old-fashioned kind of mindset in the way that they deal with smaller businesses. So represent, get out there and bang the drum for small business, join groups, join trade associations and make your voices heard. Finance is less available than it was. You need to make profits all the time, and that's something which means controlling costs quite carefully. AI can help with that, and you can also make that part of your green agenda, which feeds back again to encouraging mission and that sense of purpose that employees are looking for these days. It really only remains to me to thank our brilliant panel. They've worked extremely hard for us today, and I hope that you as the audience have got quite a lot out of it, as I have myself. I'd like to thank our sponsor as well, SAP Concur. And that concludes proceedings. Thank you.